Okay, welcome to this Southwest Marine Ecosystems webinar. My opening screen should be showing, but I'm not sure that is. Can I ask my panelists if they can see the welcome screen?
Yes, seen that fine.
Yeah, okay. As you can see, I emphasized that there is a chat button, which is for general points, information that doesn't require an answer from the panel. And then there's a Q&A button where you can ask questions of the panelists, and those questions can also be seen by other participants. Interestingly, the panelists cannot use the Q&A to ask questions and might use the chat. But those are the two buttons for you to use. Your microphones are muted, and we'll get going in a minute. And I'll just shut down that screen, stop share. Okay, and ask Doug Herdson if he'd like to make a start with his presentation.
All right. Share screen had moved. Right.
Oh,
it's okay. I've got it now. Well, good afternoon, and nice to be back again. Just a quick summary of some of the more unusual fish that have turned up in the Southwest over the last year, and a few trends that have been happening. So, working taxonomically, starting at the bottom, lampreys. We know lampreys breed in the Tamar estuary and its surrounding areas. We get young ones going out in December, January each year. But Mike Langman, who's a major bird watcher, was photographing some dolphins in Brixham, got home, looked at his photos and found an adult lamprey attached to a young dolphin. I've had photos sent to me actually of lump suckers on dolphins from the Canaries, but I've not heard of a lamprey on one before. So, sturgeon. We seem to be getting quite a few turning up. Last year there was this one off Brixham. Sorry, in 20 there was this one off Brixham, and in last year, one in October off Brixham, and then it's rather mixed whether the same thing's been reported once or three times. Sturgeon caught off Flew. It looks as if they breed down off the Gironde area of France, and about June they leave the area, and it looks as if some of them come up to our coast, and in the area from Lyme Bay through to southeast Cornwall, there seems to be a feeding area for sturgeon. They're regularly now being caught in that area. There's been no wild breeding since about 1994. All the ones that are produced by the treatment in the French works, and so come from there. The CFAS Peltic cruises take place October, November each year, and are very useful in telling us what pelagic species are around. As you can see from here, the black sprats tended to dominate last year's survey. Very good numbers of those. Also, less frequent in the deeper waters of the west, blue whiting, and also out to the west, large numbers of boarfish. However, the anchovies, the green here, not a fish we've associated with this area until recently. And the estimate of the stock from the survey was 45,617 tons, the largest ever recorded in these surveys. So it looks as if they're doing really well. There were 2 in October in Southampton water. And the pattern seems to be that they breed in the southern North Sea. It was thought for ages that they came up from Biscay, but genetics have proven that our ones along the south coast are principally from the southern North Sea. So they turn up Dorset, Portland in October, and then move along to off Plymouth, usually in November, though this is October, so they were early this year. Previous years, most of the anchovies have been off Portland. This year, the majority are off Plymouth and subsequently around. So lots of anchovies around, and that pattern of movement. A deep water fish, fairly common in the Celtic Sea, but very uncommon in our coastal waters, is the lesser Argentine. This one was caught in last April off Loo. Very large eye. So that's the lesser Argentine, a deep water species. And keeping on that theme, in the Celtic cruise, we had lots of blue whiting out to the far west, but even in our local waters, they were turning up in quite good numbers. So been seen by anglers where they're not usually caught in our coastal waters. And as I say, also found during the Celtic survey. And with them, hake. Quite a lot of large hake caught in coastal waters where they're not so common. You get the odd ones, but generally hake are out in deeper waters to the west. So large hake around, and some of these that were caught were shown to have been feeding on the blue whiting. John Dory is a pretty familiar fish in our local waters, but 2 were caught in Southampton waters where they're not normally seen. In January and August, this is one of those. However, much less common, this is actually from 2020, and this was the, checking my figures, this was the 13th I've got records of in British waters, the sailfin or silver dory or mirror dory it's sometimes called. But in 2021, 2 more were caught in the course of about 4 or 5 days off Gwenap Head in southwest Cornwall, and then 1 off Rockall. It's a species that's been shown to be spreading northwards all the time, but I'd never heard of one as far north as Rockall before. So 2 in West Cornwall and 1 right up on Rockall. There is another species, the rosy dory, which has turned up in Ireland, but never yet turned up in British waters. So that's one that needs to be looked out for. But certainly this species is moving north. Seahorses, quite a lot around last year, quite a lot of records last year. Lots in the early part of the year. Quite a few strandings and that with the storms. I haven't looked at all the results fully yet, but it does look as there's good numbers around of both species. This is the short-snouted. And they're found over quite a wide area of southern Britain. In fact, spiny, 6 were caught found in Southampton waters between January and November. So they're here pretty well all the year. Often thought of as coming into British waters or coastal waters in April time and disappearing after September, but no, recently they're here pretty well all the year. So 16 south in total in, sorry, 6 spiny in Southampton waters, 35 further ones that I've got reports of, both in Southampton water and further south and west, going right up to October. Of those, 7 were the spiny Hippocampus gutulatus, 26 the short-snouted Hippocampus, and 2 unidentified. So they seem pretty well widespread, and with present conditions, keeping numbers up reasonably. One thing that may help is during 2021, Studland Bay, which is one of the main study areas for both species, they were fitting eco moorings, where a giant screw is screwed down into the seabed, and the line from the mooring goes straight up to a float and then to the mooring buoy. If you have the mooring buoy at the surface and just connect it down to the anchorage, that line can sweep across the seabed, and that is proven to be very destructive to seagrasses, which are a helpful habitat for seahorses, amongst many other creatures. A flying gurnard, not directly related to the gurnards, it's a next order to them. This is the 4th one ever recorded in Britain, the first since 2004, and it was caught off just south of Plymouth in last October. They're about the size of a large gurnard, but they have these very large fins. They don't fly, but they are used for gliding along and possibly scaring potential predators. When a predator approaches, they flash those out and make themselves look much bigger. This shows actually the track of the trawler on that trawl that caught it. So inside the Eddystone, just south of Rainhead, halfway between Rainhead and the Eddystone is where it was caught. Another fish that's making a major, well, another group that's made major changes in the last 50 years, and particularly in the last 30, are the breams. The gilt-head sea bream, 1957, there was 1 record in the Plymouth area, one from Salcombe. Now they're all around. They're very, they're pretty common in coastal waters, and a number of large gilt-head sea breams were caught between April and September, going up to £6 and more. Cooches also goes pretty large. Say up until 1997, there were 12 records of it in Britain. Now it's generally quite widespread. This one was taken in Plymouth Sound, where there certainly seem to be good numbers. And they seem to be particularly active at night. This one from off Falmouth, showing the fantastic coloration they have at that time. They are the same species as the West Atlantic red porgy, which is targeted in the States and the Caribbean. However, the American version does not have these white tips to the tail that the British one, that the European ones do. So those now pretty common and spreading around. There was a group of them on this merle off Falmouth. I don't know. This is October. Do they breed in October? It could be. Also, in November, 2 saddled sea bream, jumping at that back. Saddled sea bream, the second ever British record was from Weymouth in November. The first one was from St Austell, I think it was about 2002. So saddled sea bream, second ever British, and the first one was a shore record. The latest one was a boat caught. So both go into the fishing records. Sorry, I was getting mixed up with earlier. The 2-banded sea bream, Diplodocus vulgaris, there was one caught off Guernsey back in 2009 by a commercial vessel, but the first 2 rod caught ones were last year. One off Padstow in September and one off Sark in October. So the saddled sea bream, this is second. The first and second 2-banded sea breams also recorded last year. Locally, it used to be a local species. The variable or ringneck, I can't see why on earth people call it ringneck, so I'm sticking with variable. Blenny, Parablenius pelicornis, first found just outside Plymouth Sound back in 2007. Now well established in the area, but it's now spread to east of, let me check my notes, yep. Right into East Dorset and through to West Cornwall. This shows a male. The males during the breeding season go virtually black. And here in Ross's coral with its eggs, the males guarding the eggs in Lulworth in Dorset in July. They've also been seen nesting. Keith has actually photographed them, I believe, in Plymouth Sound with the eggs. Stevens goby, first described by Peter Miller in, I think, the 60s, named in honor of G.A. Stevens from the Plymouth Laboratory, and was thought of as a deeper water species. However, over the last few years, they've been turning up increasingly in shallow water. This one, again, in Plymouth Sound. And there seems to be a population. Paul Naylor has seen 10 on a single dive. Excuse me a second, I've got problems with mine. Okay. Right. Sorry about that. 10 on a single dive in Plymouth Sound. They've also been seen just east of Portland Bill and in December, they were caught twice at St Mary's in the Isles of Scilly. Exactly the same place. So it's caught and released. So it may have been the same fish both times. So either 1 or 2 in the harbour in Scilly. So that is a westward extension of them in Britain. Bluefin tuna, still around in good numbers in the second half of the year. Does seem from the work of the Peltic crews that they were a bit more easterly than usual. I haven't yet been able to gather and analyze data on these around, but there were still quite a lot of sightings of them in the in the second half of the year. Bonitos, we get some most years, but and some years you get a lot. Last year, only about 5 or 6 records, but this is juvenile ones. Totally different markings in the adult, but this one collected by the Peltic Survey in late autumn, showing that they are around right through into the autumn. Most of our previous records have been kind of June to September, so they are around into the autumn and possibly longer. Dolphin fish. In 2020, there was a reported sighting by a bird watcher in southwest Cornwall. In January 2021, there was an unconfirmed report of 2 having been caught off Sorkham. So something to watch out for. There have been common dolphin fish, 1 found on the shore and a few caught offshore in the west of Ireland, and a lesser dolphin fish, 1 caught by an angler at Chesil Beach. But the common dolphin fish has not been positively confirmed in Britain. Ocean sunfish. Around, but they seem to have been scarcer last year than the previous couple of years, and less sightings. In fact, sillies, I got 10 sightings for last year compared with 18 in the previous year. So it looks as if last year was a poor year for some fish in the area. And one of those strange ones, a small lionfish, Pterois russelli or volitans most probably, could be Marzi, was said to have been caught by an angler off Chesil Beach. Difficult to find any more information on that. It was a smallish one. It looked a bit tatty. How it got to be on that beach, certainly I've seen photos of it on a line on the beach, but how it got there, impossible to tell. So with that, I'll wrap up the fish and pass over to Simon to do elasmobranchs, and I'll be back at the end on turtles. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much indeed, Doug. Fascinating stuff as always. Doug, do you want to, there isn't any chat. I'm going to ask a question though. Would you say that overall, over the past few years, there have been more range extensions of warm water species than just chance would suggest, that it is actually a trend?
Oh yes, very definitely. You know, well, going back to the 90s with gilt head bream becoming common, then cooches from 12 known from British waters to now anywhere in the southwest you might catch one. Now I see them on the fish market and that kind of thing. And with the smaller ones like the gobies, the blennies, the same way, certain species are extending their ranges. Some we might expect to, haven't. Haven't seen much in terms of red tompot. Paul's got, of course, got his behavior studies on tompot going on in the area still. Giant gobies, we're getting more reports, but whether that is a question of increasing population or just increasing awareness and reporting, can't tell. But certainly the 2 species I've mentioned there, the Stevens blenny So Stevens Goby and the the variable Blenny have shown quite large increases in their range in the last 5 years or so.
Thanks very much indeed, Doug. I use my privilege of being live on microphone, but there aren't any questions in the Q&A. So we can pass on to Simon, and it looks like you're ready for action.
Right, Doug, could you stop sharing your screen and I'll
Yes,
pass
sure.
mine over. Thanks.
Oh, I did actually have your screen up, Simon.
Aha, no, you had that one. You should now have my screen.
Ah,
Be ready to roll?
yes, that's it. That's it.
Excellent. Yep, I am going to present on the elasmobranch work that I have been doing and some other sightings that Doug has provided. Most of my work is working with charter skippers and recreational anglers. My agreement is I don't own the data, I only use it with their permission. I won't be going too much into very close geographical locations for most of these fish, but rather talk about them within ICC areas. Most of these fish are pretty mobile anyway. So yeah, I'm founder member of the Shark Hub UK and joint founder of the Pat Smith database, which collates blue shark, poor beagle shark and thresher data. I think we've got about 110,000 records now dating back to the 50s. So working onwards. Hopefully this should. Right, I thought I'd just start with some nice pictures. These are from Andrew Allsop from Whitewater Charters, taken from the Celtic Deeps. As you can see there, there's a large number of blue sharks doing what they do. That's fairly typical of the deeps. The blue sharks tend to appear on the southern edge of the Celtic front. They don't tend to go into the mixed water further north, but they are during the late summer and early autumn extremely common in that area. Next one's a beauty, our old friend the poor beagle. This was also taken by Andrew Allsop in the Celtic Deeps. This was unusually this year. Andrew saw some large females, which hasn't happened for an awful long time. He normally sees sub-adults, but for some reason this year, the large females put in an appearance. They didn't seem to be in pup, so I don't know if they finished pupping and they come to the area. But yeah, that's a rather special picture of a porgy, so I thought pass that one on. Right, these are dating back to the 50s, data for our 4 large pelagic sharks. Our predatory ones anyway. Blue sharks top left, then mako on the right hand side, poor beagle bottom left and thresher on the bottom right. As you can see, makos now are extremely rare in our waters. I think there was one caught in 2014. I have seen a couple jump in the past, but we don't see a lot of them, which is quite surprising because they're normally in with the bluefins and they certainly haven't turned up. That may reflect the dire state of mako stocks worldwide, unfortunately. There was one seen by Owen Mallia of Outlaw, runs Outlaw out of Dartmouth, and he saw it west of Portland Bill this year whilst he was fishing a wreck. He was up close to it, and as he said, it was out of the water and above him, it's pretty much certain it was a mako. As you can see from the blue shark numbers, they're much less than the 1950s, but the effort is hugely lower. Threshers, the numbers of threshers are quite extraordinary, really. When they were an occasional catch, in the last few years, not only have they reappeared in areas where they're absent for ages, they're now being seen in new areas and in large numbers. Pretty much, if you want to see a thresher, don't go anywhere near where I am, because I managed to scare them all off before I get anywhere near them. Poor beagles the same. Since 2015, there have been very large numbers of poor beagles captured. There was a large numbers caught in with the blue shark fishery off Looe and Plymouth. Most of these fish were year 0 and year 1s. We saw less of these this year, but we saw a lot of males and females, sub-adults and adults in other areas. Right, our old friend the blue shark. This is the data from 1953 to current. and it's catch per unit effort, which is sharks per trip. It's very nice because it's largely from Loo, which typically a trip is quite standardized because of the effects of the tide. This year we saw an increase in numbers on last year, which was a dip. May reflect the fact that there were more skippers out there during the peak of the period due to COVID, but may reflect an actual the fact there were more about. This is offset by Penzance, which had a fantastic start to the blue shark season in June, and then was very much affected by the algal bloom that persisted off there through a lot of August, so their catch rates dropped right off. The blue sharks did their typical thing. When the thermocline collapsed, they refused to feed for about 5 days and then returned. So that's something we see every year in the late summer, early autumn. This is, I did some modelling of chlorophyll against blue shark numbers. This is the bloom that was off Penzance for much of the autumn. As you can see, there's a link between blue sharks and ocean fronts. So up to about 1.5 mg per metre cubed chlorophyll, you see an increase in blue shark catches. As soon as it goes above that level, very thick blooms, blue sharks don't like, and it may be a fact they just can't find the bait, or it may be they actively avoid it. They certainly don't like dinoflagellates very much and tend to run a mile, as do the mackerel. This year, we didn't see as many young fish, which was interesting. Previous years, we've seen a lot of fish from, I'd say, year 1 to 3. We didn't really see that many. The average size was much higher this year. It was mainly sub-adults and adults. We did again see large males return to our waters. Typically, from the 50s through to the mid-2000s, males were extremely rare, and large mature males even more so. But we've seen a pattern since on the last few years of large males turning up in probably the end of July, beginning of August off Plymouth. They tend to be larger fish. These fish are normally seen off the eastern seaboard of America and not often seen this side of the Atlantic. The biggest one this year was just under 10 foot, which was released from Dave Uren's Plymouth boat Mirage, about 20 odd mile off Plymouth. And they are quite spectacular. The pectoral fins of the big male are incredibly large, and you can just about see a picture of one there and look at the idea of the pectorals. That one in the picture was caught from Dan Marget's boat, Savannah from Loo, and that was about 9 foot. As I said, it was the same set of tides as they turned up last year off here, so we'll see. We'll have to see whether that's repeated in subsequent years. There were also quite a lot of mature females with fresh bite marks, very fresh bite marks. Even though juvenile males will practice with females, the size of the bite marks being seen were probably from large mature males. Overall, 94% female, but 85% were estimated to be immature or sub-adult, but there were very few very small fish this year, which marked a change from previous years where the really big numbers of sharks off Plymouth tended to be largely small fish. Just a bit about where they were. In Sea Area 7E, which covers from, well, off Land's End, the Scillies, off to Swanage area, they were very rare. Blue sharks didn't want to go past Start Point. So they were west of Start Point all the way down to the Scillies. This is fairly typical. They don't like crossing into the mixed water very much. They tend to stay in stratified water if they can. They didn't come closer inshore this year. They were mostly 12 to 20 miles out and some a bit further. Some years we get them as close, and I've even seen them in the Sound, and smaller fish in the Sound in previous years, but it didn't happen this year. They largely stayed offshore. There was an almost total lack of mackerel during the summer, and that's a pattern we've seen over the last few years. Mackerel now we see in the Sound in the autumn. Mackerel seem to have moved west and north. In fact, there wasn't a lot of pilchard out there early in the season. The only obvious prey species were whiting on the bottom and very small horse mackerel, which were often, you could see them in the slick, but they were very small. So quite what the blue sharks were feeding on is a mystery. It could have been horse mackerel coming up in the water in the evening, perhaps. Sea area CF, 7F, which covers sort of Land's End up to the Celtic Deeps and the Bristol Channel. In the past, you got quite a few blue sharks there between sort of 7 and 10 miles offshore. Speaking to the skippers this year, they saw one. So they certainly weren't in that area. Contrast that with the Celtic Deeps and 7G, where there were large numbers again. They're a bit later than usual, but again, the fish seem to be larger. Again, it's very noticeable that they don't venture into 7A across the Celtic front. Places like Aberystwyth very rarely see blue sharks. Our old friend, the poor beagle, and there's a nice picture from Dan Margetts of what we call a baby bitey. So that's probably a year 0 or a year 1 fish that probably wasn't even hooked properly. It really was the year of the poor beagle. There were over 700 fish recorded this year. The majority of them were sub-adult and mature and of mixed sexes. They were caught in large numbers in areas where they haven't really been seen since the 1970s, and probably larger numbers since even when it was back to the 70s, in areas 7D, east of 7E. So they were fairly common east of Start Point, as contrasting with the blue sharks that were west of Start Point. 7F, large numbers, and 7G, and they did venture up to sort of Aberystwyth in the Irish Sea up to 7A as well. As I said, we found very few of the pups that we've seen in previous years. I think one of the skippers had one on the first day out, and there were another couple caught, but not in the numbers we've seen them around, typically around wrecks and reefs that we've seen in previous years. I don't know if this is just a change in the movement of the females or whether they just didn't pup around here this year for some strange reason. One of the things that was very noticeable was the sexual segregation of the large numbers of poor beagles. Typically, the males, the ratio was favouring the males, sort of 85-15, closer inshore during the summer. Was as you got further offshore, it was the other way around with females dominating. They weren't exclusively in shoals, but they were largely separated by the shallow water males, deeper water females. The large females seen in the Celtic Deeps didn't look like they were full of pup, which was interesting. That was tended to be in June and July, so it suggests they have pupped at that around that time or before that time. But there were no sign of the pups in the area, so actually where they pupped is a bit of a mystery. In the Celtic Deeps, they're found in very similar areas to where they get the blue sharks, and that's the same in the deeper parts of in area 7F. As you can see, on the right, the numbers have repeated. The numbers have gone up greatly in the last few years. There was some seen in Plymouth. We probably, when we're blue shark fishing, we actually drive over the top of them. There was I think it was said shark attacked boat I saw somewhere or other, and there was a very interesting video of a poor beagle that was probably around 350 pounds, showing an enormous amount of interest for an outboard motor on somebody's boat. Then the man took it as interest in biting him. I just suspect he was actually after the sacrificial anode. He probably detected the electrical signal and found that greatly interesting. Whether this is a sign of stock recovery or a change in movement, that's not really for me to say. You'd have to put that in other data, but I would say that certainly we have not seen numbers of poor beagles in our waters like this for an awful long time. As I said, they've returned amazingly, despite the separation of so many years. They're in exactly the same areas that they were back in the 70s, which suggests there are very good reasons why they're there. There was a juvenile, I think most people saw it, in Plymouth Sound and Sutton Harbour in mid-April. And as I said before, there was this large fish that was having a good look at the anode on somebody's outboard, and that was in early July. Threshers. And on the right, you can see a picture of a thresher taken from Loo. You can see from the colour that it looks rather beautiful. Again, it's not a fish I've seen a lot of, but there were a surprising number around this year. It's always a species that has been thought to be very rare globally. Even in the areas where they do see them in the UK, they have been an occasional catch. The last few years, there seem to be more around there forever than there have been before. There were 7 fish hooked off Plymouth and Loo this year, which I haven't heard of that number before. And in Sea Area 7F, which I've never heard of a thresher, one skipper released 8 fish in 3 days, and they were in with some poor beagles and some blue sharks. So I don't know what they were doing in there. We've got records going back to the 70s in that area, and there was never a thresher reported. They were remarkably close to shore as well. From Sea Area 7D, which is east of Portland, the catch per unit effort was the highest since they started recording records. Interestingly, the season started off very well. They continued to see fish for several weeks, but they weren't apparently feeding, and then they all fed at the same time at the end of that. So whether they were interested in other things for that period of time, I have no idea. They seem to track from 7D westwards during the autumn, and there were more reported off Plymouth down to the Lizard during the chart program, which ran from late August through to November. And for a couple of weeks, they were videoed actually chasing the toad lures for the tuna. Typically, they just come up and swipe it with their tail, have a couple of goes and get disinterested and go off. Fortunately, none were hooked because we don't really like hooking them in the tail. It doesn't lead to good outcomes. But it's fairly nice to see them around anyway. Dr. Jones, Georgia Jones of Bournemouth University was incredibly lucky. She went out on a trip with Murray Collins from Loo, primarily to get mucus samples and fin clippings from blue sharks. Fortunately, she had a license to do threshers as well, and she came across this rather lovely looking creature. She managed to get mucus samples from it, which she's looking at stable isotopes, fatty acid, and we've also got some DNA back from it. So I don't know if anyone else has managed to do that from threshers in this country, but it'll be very interesting to see what the results are. There were 2 fish caught in similar areas in a week off Loo. One was a fish of about 75 kg, and the one in the picture there was approximately 120 kilograms. And as I said, they were chasing toad lures doing charts. Unfortunately, none were hooked. There were skippers with 30 odd years experience at sea who've never seen a thresher. We saw several this year. So either the conditions were very good for seeing them, or there were just more about. Some lovely pictures from Spencer Wright, the skipper of yellowfin, of separate threshers. You can see the colours are quite spectacular. They have very strict requirements about never bringing these fish out of the water, and you can see the circle hook's doing its job. These fish were recovered, and they tend to tow them to actually reoxygenate them and then released. So I just thought they were rather lovely pictures of a fish that I've yet to see. Six gills. There's only one person who really specialises them in the UK, and that's Kevin Mackey, who still does run Size Matters. He has a particular area in the Western Approaches he fishes for them. They can only get there on very small tides and in very flat weather. It's in pretty deep water, about 500 foot, I believe. In July 2021, he managed 14 fish in 21 hours fishing. And these vary between very small fish, around 25 pound, up to estimated 450 pound. He's seen numbers in this area every time he's been there, so they seem to be quite a lot of these fish there. They don't seem to be the very big ones they get off Ireland, the 1,500 pound fish. They're mainly in the sort of 200 to 450 pound mark. He did say it was really nice because he saw some very small fish this year. He found out they were there because he was shown a picture by one of the hake netters, and that they were hake and poor beagles, interestingly enough, large numbers of poor beagles that had obviously gone into the nets to actually get at the hake, and they had then themselves be predated on by something. He showed various people the pictures, and the general idea was they were probably 6 gills, and he successfully went out there and found them. There was also a juvenile caught off the Isle of Wight this year, and I believe there was another one found somewhere else. I think it might have been the Channel Islands, but I've not heard of a big fish being, a large fish being caught anywhere else apart from in the western approaches. Basking sharks, a species that we used to see an awful lot of down here, but seem to have gone elsewhere in the last few years. I would say they were sporadic in the southwest last year. I sort of caught a glance of one, but that was about it. There was one seen in Portloo Bay by the AK Wildlife Cruises on the 12th of April. Similarly, the paddle boarders saw one in Torquay Marina, and that was around on the 14th. And the same day, the harbour master, the RNLI coxswain Mark Criddle, saw one in Brixham Harbour. Round about the middle of that month, there were large numbers in Mounts Bay, and that seemed to continue into May with Penbeth and Porthcurno. Josh Symes of Coastal Boat Trips reported that. Debbie Shotter saw one in July between Plymouth and the Eddystone, and that's probably about the time I saw one as well. But I just caught a glimpse of the fin. There was also been seen on the Slonian Crossing in July. As I said, we didn't see any in the autumn as far as I know, which we used to see some, but very much reflects the fact we, years ago we'd see them most times we went out. Now they're an occasional sighting around here. Other elasmobranchs, which actually I must admit quite surprised me. We have an angel shark, which was actually, well, two. One was caught by a trawler, Joy Ladram, in the mid-channel off Falmouth, and one caught off Seaton, which surprised me, again in a trawl. Both were apparently returned. I do know years ago, it was reported to me that there were aggregations of them that came in close inshore of Falmouth, and they were seen on the off Swampole Beach at certain times a year by divers apparently, but apparently that hasn't happened for a lot of years. There was one caught by an angler in a more typical place where they're found, which is Cardigan Bay. And on the left-hand side, you can make it out because it's doing its best to hide. There's a stingray which was caught off the Chesil Beach in July. Now, stingray are normally associated with the Solent and the West Sussex beaches. You do get some on the Chesil, but they're slightly less usual. You don't tend to get them much around our way. I've certainly never seen one around here. There was an electric ray reported earlier, but that'll have to go earlier this year, but that'll have to go into next year's reports, I'm afraid. So I believe that finishes my my report on elasmobranchs. And are there any questions?
Well, thank you very much indeed, Simon. I've been answering questions which were not about sharks particularly as we've gone along. So the Q&A session, the questions have been answered. But Doug, have you got any points or questions?
Well, I'll come in on turtles in a minute. A couple of things. There was earlier this year a really small 6-gill found, I don't remember, caught or found off the Kent coast.
Amazing.
So that's an amazing one. It was thought to be a 7-gill at the time, but I've seen its teeth and it was a 6-gill. Also, I forgot to mention, Simon was talking about chart. During this, the 2021 season, a lot of charter boat skippers have been licensed to catch bluefin tuna and tagging them. So there's been quite a bit of tagging of the bluefin tuna going on. So we hope to see some results from that. Mainly just the spaghetti tags. I don't know if there were any archival ones put on.
I think there was 708 bluefin tuna tagged by 15 boats over the course of the programme, which is quite startling.
Okay, well, we'll see if any of those are recovered, and whether it tells us anything, because obviously the bluefin tuna popping up are very much, you know, sort of comeback kids, as it were.
Yep.
And to an extent, I suppose poor beagles could be comeback kids. But, you know, I've seen and photographed a very large number being thrown into the back of a fish market lorry at Ilfracombe that were caught off Lundy, I think in the late 1980s. So,
oh, it was shocking. I mean, some of the boats that actually fished rod and line for them were actually landing the fish that the anglers were catching, which to me was just madness. And you know, why would you do that? And they were selling them as, you know, it was crazy. And they literally seemed to fish out an area, find a new one, fish it out. Fortunately now, catch and release is, you'd be driven off a cliff if you were found to kill one of these creatures now.
Yeah.
We're slowly getting better on handling as well, which is useful.
Back around 2004, there was a commercial fisherman out of Newlyn who just found a patch of sub-adult threshers and landed about 150 over the course of 4 or 5 days. Completely hit that stock really badly.
Yeah.
I'm quite surprised at the numbers that are still caught as bycatch in some of the ground gear off the southwest, but they're sort of disincentivized to report them because they don't really want to be driven off the hate grounds.
There's can I just say I am looking forward to seeing poor beagle sharks off the Mewstone when I'm diving then, I think.
Oh yes.
Yeah,
they tend to be very curious. They tend to hang around North Sea oil rigs and that, and turn up to see what the divers are doing.
Oh, I've had one going up and down off myself and my dive buddy off Rockall, the Rock of Rockall, and it seemed to be sussing out whether we were something to be eaten or not. And 2 other divers had 3 circling them at Rockall, and they came to the surface waving and shouting to be picked up as quickly as possible. So let's see.
I don't think I'm giving anything away here, but some of the areas they're caught, they are so close inshore to some of the surf beaches, I'm sure the surfers come into fairly close contact with them.
Well, I'm sure that the Sun newspaper, the Daily Mirror, the Mail will be delighted to hear that. I've got one.
And they'll call them Makos.
Yeah, I've got, while you swap over your slideshows, there's one question here about one topic covered was how tagging affects sharks. Are there any thoughts about how tagging might affect sharks adversely or not at all?
Depends what tag you use. I think if it's done properly, it probably doesn't. I don't tag fish because I think tagging's been, especially for blues, it's been done to death, conventional tagging. I just collect catch data. For me, it's more valuable, length, frequency and numbers. If it's done properly, I think it's probably minimal effect, but it needs to be done properly.
Okay, well, thank you very much for that. And
I'll
Simon, if you
sharing
can
my
close,
screen.
if you can close your screen down, and then Doug can say something about turtles. But thank you very much indeed. We'll come back at the end to the final thanks. There we go.
Actually, one thing that came up with fish, which I forgot to mention, it does seem that one of the notable things of last year was that the conditions seem to have brought a number of species which are relatively common in deep waters into our coastal areas, the Argentine, the blue whitings, the hake, and possibly pushing some things like the tuna a bit up the channel. So there does seem to be a kind of a change there. Right, carrying on. Turtles. The year started off with this young, recently dead loggerhead, unfortunately turning up at Bucksmills Beach in North Devon. This is a loggerhead, what we call a hard shell. The groups, there's about 7 turtles can occur in Britain, but we tend to separate them into hard shells, which are principally loggerhead, Kemp's Ridley, and green. Also, you can get olive ridley. I don't think there's ever been a hawksbill. And the leathery, sorry, I'll go back, such as this one, the leatherback. One of the last of the year, I think it might have been the last, was this young Kemp's Ridley that turned up at Northern Burrows in North Devon. It was found alive but cold stunned, but it was taken into Blue Reef Aquarium, but unfortunately, despite what they could do for it, it didn't survive beyond a day. So the overall figures for the year was a loggerhead, then a sighting of a possible loggerhead of St. Ives, a probable hardshell seen swimming off Marazion, a leatherback that got entangled in pot rope but was freed by fishermen and swam away, a leatherback seen from a tripping boat, then the Kemp's Ridley on the North Devon, and I've just learnt this morning of a Kemp's Ridley that was found dead in North Somerset. It is very unusual. Normally, if you look at these figures for the southwest, it's dominated by leatherbacks with just a few hard shells. And also, the last 2 years' numbers have been low, partly due to less people being out to see them, we think. But this year, nationally, Britain and Ireland, the numbers have been high, but our numbers in the southwest have retained low. But it's the only place and only time when I've seen figures when there's been more hard-shell turtles identified than leatherbacks. A really strange phenomena. Okay.
Okay, thanks very much indeed, Doug. No one's posted any chat or questions. So unless there's anything that you've forgotten that you wanted to say and you'd like to say it, then if you can shut down your
I will be
screen.
working on the published report. So any observations of fish and particularly turtle sightings, I'm still very much willing to accept. So please do send those through to me, and they'll go into the annual Southwest Marine Ecosystems report.
Yeah.
Thanks.
And if you haven't managed to scribble that down, Bob Earl sends out an occasional reminder of who the different section editors are of the annual report. And so you can remind yourself if you've got observations of anything to do with Southwest Marine Ecosystems in 2021, then do send them to the relevant editors. So I'm not sure why we can still see Doug, but that doesn't matter. I'm just going to share this. You're seeing me? Are you? Oh, I don't understand this system. I'm just going to put that up, and I'm going to share my screen if I can find it, just as a final thank you to everyone. You know, I'm supposed to get a green line around it when I'm. Can you see that farewell screen?
Yes.
Yeah, you can see the farewell screen. Okay, well, look, I'm just going to make the point that as we work towards making our presentations and reports into a state of the Southwest Seas report, because that's what we're heading towards, is rather than just curiosity type stuff, actually trying to indicate what our observations tell us about the state of the Southwest Seas. Then if you've got any interpretations or any conclusions, or know of any scientific papers which will help to interpret some of these observations, then do let the relevant editors know. And finally, thank you very much indeed to our speakers, our presenters, and to the participants for joining us today. And of course, thank you to the Marine Biological Association for hosting these Zoom meetings. And with that, I'll say thank you very much, and I'll try to close down. Jack, are you still there? Can you close down? Because I can't get the right screen.